Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us here for the first of our Housing Forward Massachusetts candidate conversations with the Boston mayoral candidates. We're thrilled to be joined by Acting Mayor Kim Janey, who will be joining us in this webinar shortly. I want to start off by thanking you for your interest, for taking the time to join us today. My name is Josh Zakim. I'm the Executive Director of Housing Forward Mass. I want to also take this time to thank some of our friends and supporters for helping spread the word and joining today, in particular, Abundant Housing Massachusetts, which is certainly an ally in this work, as well as MHC, our board at Housing Forward Massachusetts, and our team, myself, Kendall Feynman, who've done incredible work to put this together. Obviously, this is an exciting opportunity to talk with the acting mayor about her vision for housing and production in the city of Boston moving forward. And we thank you for joining. Give you a quick outline of how things will work today. We will be starting off with a brief conversation based on the Housing Forward Massachusetts report, which you've all received a link to. I encourage you to check it out on our website, housingforwardma.org. If you're following along, this is available at Facebook Live at the Housing Forward Mass Facebook page. And also feel free to tweet at us or about this event. We're really excited to kick this off and get things going. And we'll be here as soon as the mayor is able to join us. And there we have Mayor Janey. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is a pleasure to see you.
How are you? Thank you so much. I apologize, running from another event on the other side of town.
No worries. We're glad you're here. I was just sort of laying the groundwork, talking about Housing Forward and sort of our recent report that was out there that we're sort of basing this conversation on about, the things that you as acting mayor come November after the election, folks, policy changes that can be made to address affordability challenges in Boston. And as you know, Mayor, and I think as many folks know, the city, based on a report that was done a few years ago, needs 69,000 new housing units by 2030 just to house, our growing population that's going to approach nearly 800,000 people. And as I encouraged everyone who logged on, whether here or on Facebook Live, to check out the Housing Forward report, we're suggesting a range of solutions that are largely revenue neutral that Boston's mayor can take. And would love to hear your thoughts on that. Would also love to hear what your thoughts are generally on housing. Obviously, your work in the city before becoming acting mayor and since has been very focused on that, both in the COVID relief and rental relief situation and moving forward. So if it's all right with you, jump into a couple of the solutions that we've proposed from our work, and would love to hear if you'd like to just maybe talk a little bit about your focus on housing, if that makes sense for you, Mayor.
Sure.
Great. So a couple things that have come up over and over is that I'm just going to list them quickly, and then we can maybe delve into them a little closer, is, working on increasing production. What are the barriers to creating more housing supply, particularly low-income housing, missing middle housing, folks for middle-income folks, working-class families in the city of Boston, and what the city can do around that. And a lot of that is around making expedited permitting for smaller projects, dedicating staff to those issues, working with neighborhood groups and the community at large, as well as with the regulatory agencies like the ZBA, the BPDA, and the Zoning Commission, to really focus on making sure we're building enough for a growing city. People want to be in Boston. It's an exciting place to be. It's a good problem to have, obviously, that people want to be here, but we need to make sure the city remains an equitable city, a place where everyone is going to have that opportunity to be here. And that's something that we are really trying to focus on right now. So I would love to hear, what your thoughts are on some of these initiatives, also making sure that we're building generational wealth and equity through helping folks become homeowners and first-time home buyer programs, things of that sort, as well as increasing the stock of the rental market at all levels. So would love your thoughts on that, what you've been working on. Please share with us, and I'll have some follow-ups, and then we'll take some of the questions that folks have been asking online before and during this conversation.
Well, thank you, Josh. Let me start by thanking you and everyone on your team. Want to thank Housing Forward for all of the work that you do. This is the challenge. It is, as you say, a good problem to have that so many people want to live in our city. But the flip side to that is, unfortunately, so many folks are being displaced and pushed many times out of our city. And so for me, as someone who grew up here, born and raised in Boston, have seen and experienced the housing challenges firsthand, it is very important to me that we are leading in such a way that welcomes newcomers, as well as holds on to many of our residents who call Boston home. Just a little bit about me before I dive in. For folks who don't know, as I mentioned, I'm born and raised in Boston, grew up in the neighborhoods of Roxbury and the South End, experienced housing insecurity firsthand. As a young girl, my parents were divorced, and oftentimes living with my mom, we lived in subsidized housing, occasionally had to double up, even spent a week in a homeless shelter for women and children. My very first apartment I was able to get as a young single mom with a Section 8 voucher, and then buy my first home, which I have now lived in 20 plus years, through a first-time home buyers program. And so really bring a unique perspective and lens when it comes to dealing with these issues overall. I also want to just acknowledge that just days ago, the eviction moratorium expired. And so for me, there is a deep commitment and a sense of urgency as we are tackling these issues. And we need solutions that look in the immediate in terms of dealing with the eviction moratorium being lifted, as well as some longer term solutions. Just as it relates to the eviction moratorium, my team has been proactively working, doing outreach, expanding the staff to receive calls, making sure we are following the court cases that I invested right in my first week in office, $50 million into the rental relief fund so that we could help residents stay in their homes. We know that thousands of residents have been helped, 3,200 to date, 70% of whom live in BIPOC communities. About 30% are individuals who are in the hospitality industry, which is our third largest industry in Boston. And I bring that up because that has a ripple effect in terms of, jobs and people's ability to live and work in the city that they currently call home. We need to have, housing policies that look at a whole range of issues. So certainly in the immediate, making sure that we're doing everything to mitigate evictions and helping people stay in their homes and stay in Boston. But you mentioned in your opening home ownership, and that is deeply, deeply important to me as I see it, not only as a way to stabilize our communities, but as a way to break the cycle of poverty and build generational wealth. I also experienced losing our family's home due to gentrification of the South End, and we see how that is impacting so many neighborhoods right now in Boston, whether East Boston, Chinatown, Roxbury. In my home neighborhood of Roxbury, housing costs have grown 70% in a 5-year period. So home ownership has to be an important piece as we look at different solutions. And it is also why I have tripled the investment in down payment assistance, bringing that to previously $10,000 down payment assistance to $40,000. And again, this program has largely been used by people of color in the city of Boston. And that is critically important as we look to close the wealth gap here. I could keep going. I don't know if you want to ask
Oh,
specific questions,
thank
because
you.
there's a lot in terms of what we need to do in terms of development, in terms of legislation at the State House, in terms of policies that we have here, just the criteria that I think is important as we think about development in our city.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Mayor. And that's really a big focus of what we're trying to look at. What we, at Housing Forward is trying to do is we're looking at things that don't require, big legislative change, don't require permission from the State House. And, despite, I'd say, the increased production of housing over the last decade or so, we're still way behind. I mean, that's 70,000 number, almost 70,000 number by 2030, just to house our expected population growth. And, if you could talk a little bit, you are in a unique position of being acting mayor. What's happening, obviously dealing with COVID, a public health crisis, things going on, but thinking a little longer term, what's your vision on, say, is there a way we can expedite approvals for affordable and middle income housing projects? Is there a way that we can make sure we're supporting folks in the neighborhoods who say, look, there's a vacant lot or there's a city-owned lot, and I can, if I didn't have to go through a 2-year review process, I could probably get the resources to build a 2 or 3 family house there that would go back to Boston's tradition of, a place where a family could be and not being displaced, keeping wealth in our communities, building that generational wealth, closing some of that gap in equity. And I realize that's a lot, but this is a big issue that encompasses so many aspects of it.
Yeah. And so all of those things we are looking at. Certainly, I think one of the lessons from COVID in terms of how the city of Boston does business is needing to streamline different processes, whether that be how we support small businesses around the permitting that they were seeking as we were moving toward outdoor dining, and certainly in development. That being said, we're going to continue to do our due diligence. So as we streamline it, it is to just make things less cumbersome. But the checks and balances that we need to do, we still need to do those things. There are a number of vacant lots that we need to look at, most of which will go to housing, but also very proud to say that we are also looking at expanding green space and making sure that there's access to more healthy foods and dealing with our food insecurity in the city of Boston through community gardens. And we want to see creative approaches in terms of whether they be neighborhood associations or civic groups that are coming together. Certainly, I know CDCs have been at the table looking at different opportunities to build and develop and address our housing crisis. We know we were in a housing crisis long before COVID-19. And the challenge and much of the production that was happening is that it was either very deeply affordable or very, very expensive. And so many folks who are working in the city of Boston, who live in the city of Boston, who are making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 were being left out. And so we have to be very intentional as we think about housing in Boston and ensuring that there is housing for working families here in the city of Boston. We want to continue to partner, whether that be with civic groups, with CDCs, with development teams that have done a good job in housing, to make sure that they are coming to the table and being solution oriented. This is why I was very pleased to host a discussion with some business leaders on this very topic about 6 weeks ago, just to kind of hear some of the ideas that were coming. I think part of what I also want to do is be very intentional about creating space for diverse groups and making sure that we're doing everything through an equity lens. And that came up a lot in this discussion, the need to make sure that we were creating opportunities for folks to participate in meaningful ways here. And so that looks at, the ZBA or particularly the BPDA process and how we are bringing people to the table and what we are looking for when we do so. And so the drafting of our RFPs and how those are rated, and what we're expecting from folks, as well as people who we want to house. Now, obviously, there are fair housing laws, and we won't jeopardize that, but I think we do want to be very intentional about creating space for some of our vulnerable populations, the LGBTQ community, for example, doing much more around senior housing. I think we have real opportunities in Boston to make sure that we are working on that front. And so everything from streamlining permitting, and making sure that we are being intentional about the type of development that we are asking for in Boston and want to see is really important.
I think that's great. Thank you, Mayor. That's a good segue in talking about, the permitting process. And listen, every project in every neighborhood is different. Everyone knows that. I had the privilege of serving on the city council, and I was thrilled to serve with you only for one term. But that equity lens you talk about, was evident obviously from the very start, before you joined the body, since, and now as acting mayor. And it's critical. Boston is a growing and thriving city in many ways, but there is a divide. There's a large divide, and it's been growing. So I certainly think the first-time homebuyer programs have an important place in building generational wealth and keeping people in their communities. But at the end of the day, we need to be building more for people to live in the city of Boston. And one of the things that's a challenge is, not taking, something that a mayor is in a unique position to do, is to take a citywide view and say, we've seen this report, we need 69,000 new units. Maybe it'll be more, maybe it'll be a little less over the next, 10 or so years. And to get there, and I always look back, they're the big projects that get the headlines, the luxury skyscraper, et cetera. And there's a place for that, sure. But what you talked about is the middle class housing, the family housing. A lot of that gets stymied or costs increase because of a long and arduous process. And, we all saw what happened recently with in Jamaica Plain, where there were challenges from a neighbor who didn't want a housing development right there. And that slows things down and costs add on. So I don't know if there's a exactly correct answer, but I think it's important for us to be thinking and talking about, and when a mayor of the city of Boston is making appointments to a ZBA or a BPDA or a zoning commission, to keep that lens in mind. And I think that's that. So we have
Yeah, I would just, that is another lever, the appointments to the various boards and commissions, certainly, as well as, having some new policies that are not necessarily blanket approach across the city. We want to make sure that we are, seeking to do and being intentional about mixed income development, and creating more opportunities to live in different neighborhoods all throughout our city. Right now, we have certain neighborhoods that have, deep pockets of wealth. And then there are deep pockets of poverty in our city. And so that happened, through development processes. And so if we want to change that, if we think that is a challenge, if we want to create more opportunities, we have to be intentional about how we do that moving forward. And I know you wanted to talk mostly about the city and what the city can do, but I do think there's important legislation at the state, and working with our state partners, everything from, requiring legal representation, at the State House. There's a bill there, should folks find themselves being evicted, and very timely given the, the lifting of the moratorium. Certainly love to see, some work with our state partners on getting something more local in terms of, a moratorium here. There are advocates who have been pushing for rent stabilization, and they have a bill that they're working on. And so I think there are all kinds of ways that we can look at local solutions, as well as working with our state partners, and working with our local advocates and housing rights groups. In my FY22 budget, there was the rental vouchers that we expanded. That is all of these things together are so critically important. There is not a kind of a one and done. I know people want to talk about this like there's just some one magic bullet that's going to solve all of this, but it is all of these things working together that will help our residents stay in Boston.
I think that that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. I don't mean to discount the importance of partnerships with the state or certainly the federal government on resources at a minimum. I
Yeah.
often talk to folks that, at the end of the day, it's incredible that we finally have an administration in Washington that believes government has a role to play in housing, in making a more equitable society. But a lot of this work, as you know better than anyone, is happening on the ground in cities and towns and city and town halls. And having that view of it is so important. So I do want to be mindful of time. We have some questions that have come in from attendees, and I will start going through those. Some people emailed ahead of time. Some are asking them live based on our discussion. So there's the first one right here. It's a timeless question. I often got it as a city councilor. So as property taxes and insurance goes up, it's making it difficult for folks who are homeowners but who are retired or are living on limited incomes to stay in their homes and meet those obligations. And it's a tough situation for Boston being so dependent on property taxes. What are your thoughts on that? Are there programs in place or things that we can do to help folks who are retired, elders, living off their pension, to stay in the homes that they've had for so long?
Yeah, this is a really important question. So much of our city's budget is dependent upon property tax revenue. And we are at a place where it is about 3/4 of the budget is property tax. And so we are very dependent upon those property taxes, but we also have to understand that Boston is 2/3 renters. And so that burden is falling on a very small number of individuals. And for those who are retired and on a limited income, it is very difficult. And so we will continue to work with our seniors on ways that we can be supportive and helping around property tax, whether they be abatement programs. There is a program for those who have perhaps fallen behind in their taxes to work some of that off. And so that has been in existence, and we want to continue to work with our seniors to find creative ways. The bottom line is, though, we have to diversify our revenue stream, because this is a very just unsustainable. I was proud to get a transfer fee home rule petition passed through the city council, and I have not given up on that, and working with our state partners to get something passed. That particular one would have generated, a couple of $100 million that we could invest in housing, the preservation of housing, the creation of new housing. And I think there are, other ways that we can be creative. There are expiring use that we want to see, stay permanently affordable. And, we have to do everything we can. Again, it's every single tool in the toolbox.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And, something that always frustrated me as a city council was that same budget issue. You look at peer cities, and 75% is incredibly high that our city budget is based on property taxes. Many of our peer cities, it's rare to see a city more than 30 or 40%. Thinking about New York or Chicago, they have other revenue streams, and that's a constant challenge. I remember a report, gosh, it must have been written, 12 years ago at this point, really outlining that and the challenges it leaves for Boston, which is when housing prices or the economy is booming, we're doing okay. Some are, at least the top line is doing okay. But it's really not wise to be forced, and it's the state, I want to be clear, that has made these rules that has the city relying on property taxes for so much of its revenue. So looking at other opportunities for revenue is critically important. So I see another question. This is a good one. Could be a little tough, Mayor, sorry. So now that you are mayor and you've had a chance to see from the other side of the building how ISD and other city agencies are working, do you have suggestions or ideas, for streamlining some of the permitting processes, whether it's for, smaller scale or affordable housing, or for businesses, or what have you seen in that way, either in your prior role, as a city councilor, or really working with local businesses from that angle, or now as mayor in the last few months?
Yeah, so my team is working now on streamlining permitting processes, both on the business side and development side. Again, in each case, we have to continue to do our due diligence, but I think it has been clear for quite some time that Boston is a hard entity, in terms of the city government to do business with. And we've heard it, as you said, serving together on the other side of the building. We've often heard it from folks. And I think, COVID has showed us that, when needed, we were able to move quickly. And so I think we want to take those lessons. And so my team is working on doing just that. In terms of dealing with, I think part of the question was on affordability, was there?
Yeah, it goes back, I think I mentioned earlier, streamlining that for, if, again, smaller, medium-sized residential projects, particularly.
So one thing that, well, we want to streamline it for everyone, regardless of the size, but I want to stress, we got to do our due diligence. Because what we need to make sure is that we're holding people accountable. What we can't do are see landlords or developers who are trying to cut corners, who are not following the rules, who are being bad players in this space. And we want to make sure that we have the checks and balances in place to hold them accountable. When it comes to opportunities, though, to do some smaller developments, we are looking at revising the IDP in a way that would trigger affordability with a smaller number of units. So again, tackling this housing crisis from a number of fronts. We want to look at the unit size, square footage, and looking at the AMI, as well as on-site versus on-site, off-site versus on-site. I don't think there is one policy that we could adopt on that, because I think we want to be mindful that in some cases we need the flexibility to say the affordability is really needed here on-site, or we could benefit if we put it, close to the original project, but somewhere else. And so I want us to have that flexibility, but I think there are lots of things that we are looking at there, as well as the percentage of units. Right now it is limited, and we want to try to raise that up, but we want to do so in a way that is mindful and that ensures that we can continue to grow the housing stock that we need in the city of Boston to benefit folks who want to live here, whether they're coming and excited to be part of all the great things that are happening, or they're here already and want to stay here and are feeling the pressure in terms of housing costs.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And that actually rolls right into the next question, which is, I don't know if the folks out there are coordinating or not, but these are all very on theme. So the question I see next is, what is your strategy? So we've acknowledged the critical need for more housing, especially affordable, but also then with the need to take in the views and wishes of the immediate neighborhood where a project is being built. Because, as we've seen, this can slow things down. It can make units smaller, and sometimes that's good. To your point about due diligence, everyone at the table, people who know their neighborhoods and care about their neighborhoods, should have a voice at the table. But again, we have this citywide need for more housing. How are we going to balance that? And in Boston, a lot of that emanates from the mayor's office.
Yeah. So I think, there is this balance that we really have to find. You mentioned earlier NIMBYism. And for me, community voice is very, very important. And I think what we don't want to fall into the trap of NIMBYism, and just have the few people with the loudest voices coming to say, no, we don't want this, if we know that it is really needed. On the other hand, we do want to make sure that our processes are really led and driven by what the needs are in a community. And we want to engage residents in that process. We want to make sure that the neighborhood associations are getting the information and are able to participate and help shape, what that neighborhood, the future of that neighborhood and what that development will look like. And oftentimes, I think it can be frustrating because many times the conversation is centered around parking. And I want us as mayor to really lead us to be prioritizing people. We are in a housing crisis, and we know that. And we were in a housing crisis long before COVID, and COVID has made it worse. And so while I know parking is very important to residents, we've got to be mindful that the parking challenges are not going to be solved in development. The parking challenges are going to be solved by, one, getting more cars off our roads altogether, and then two, making sure that our roads are better equipped and are serving multiple modes of transportation. And the more parking that you build into development, the more cars you attract. It's like this, this dynamic that's really interesting that
You're
plays
getting
out.
a lot of virtual applause right now, Mayor, from this side.
What's that? Oh, virtual applause. I mean, it's a tough conversation though, because residents feel very strongly often, and they density for them is a proxy around parking. And so, even though, a lot of folks are biking and using other modes of transportation, I'm a big fan of public transit. I, take the T. Even now, still as mayor, me and my team get out on the T. And I was very proud to move forward on some of my longstanding advocacy with a free bus pilot, because I think our city is very car dependent, even though it is a very walkable city and a very T-friendly city. Now, we want our T to work better for sure, but it's a challenge. And so I want us to always remember, though, when we're talking about housing and development, we've got to prioritize people. And I think often we get, into conversations about parking.
Yeah. Well, I think, so that's something I just want to add on to, is that in cities like Boston, any dense city, if we're requiring a lot of parking in residential, you're essentially choosing parking over housing in many cases. And it's something that I think needs to be discussed. I think there's a growing awareness of that, as you just said. There was a national study I saw earlier this week that ranked Boston the 4th best city to be carless in. Now, I'm not sure exactly of their data.
Well, I like that. I would say that it is a very walkable city, Josh, but we also have the best and #1 ranking for being worst at driving in traffic and congestion. So one, bad drivers in terms of that, fussing people out and cutting people off, but the other ranking is in congestion. And I know we like to be the best in #1, but those are titles we don't want to have here in Boston.
I agree.
But I like the one, it's a good city to be carless, but I think, it's people there, and there are different reasons why people rely on their cars. We also have to be mindful of that. So I'm not coming down against people who want to drive their cars. I understand that for many, that is, an important mode of transportation for them. And there are reasons why they, don't choose to use others. But it's that balance of really making sure we're bringing in community voice, but that we're leading from a common set of values. And for me, we really do have to center people in this, and equity in this, and making sure that we're building the housing that we need, and that we have the affordability that we need, and that we're creating opportunities for home ownership in all of this as well. I feel like we're running low on time. That's why I wanted to get those points out, but I know you probably have one more question.
We could talk all day about this, but I do know you have a few other things going on. I want to say, I see there are some questions we're not going to be able to get to from the audience. There is one, though, that I think is somewhat timely. And it's really, a question of, when you're talking about, the number of units of housing and what people are building, breaking it down into, how much is for low income housing, how much a middle income housing, and how much market rate is happening right now. And I guess, I'm paraphrasing the question right now, but how do you, how do we measure that? How do we continue encouraging that? And again, there are the rules. There's inclusionary development policies and linkage, et cetera. But also, we want to incentivize people as well, make it easier for them to build stuff that's not going to sell or rent at the top of the market. Is that something you're thinking about, your team is, and do we have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I know there people who are in development space, they are worried about investors and, looking to make that profit. Again, for me, we've got to center people in all of this. And I think, as I mentioned, the people have been able to build with the deeply affordable because there's a way to pay for that. People have been able to build the very luxury top of the line because there's a way to pay for that. So for me, I think we've got to be creative around how we're dealing with that middle population, folks who are, working as janitors, working as nurses, people who are working in retail management, people who are making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. Which sounds like a lot to some folks, but I think what we understand in a city like Boston, it really isn't, because you can't afford to live in a city like Boston on that income, not by yourself. Maybe if you have a roommate or a partner who is living with you, then so we have to do more on the affordability piece, recognizing that workforce housing in the middle and how we create more of that. And at the same time, making sure that we have an economic strategy around bringing people's wages up. And this is why, I've been very much talking about Boston's recovery, reopening, and renewal in the context of, centering workers and focusing on how we are creating better economic opportunities. I think, we also have an opportunity here, Josh, to look at different sectors, different industries, whether it's life science or, some other sector that can help take care of some of that housing, offset the cost of people like the housing in the middle. So if we're not getting those federal tax credits, what else, how can we fuel that type of housing that we know we need in our city by being creative on some of the larger development projects that, have that anchor tenant that can help offset, the cost there.
And it's to their benefit. If you want to have a workforce at all levels, we have this life sciences boom, which is wonderful, great. But, there are people who are working at all levels in those lab spaces, in those offices, and people need a place to live. And now,
exactly.
And granted, we're on Zoom right now. This, the world has changed in a lot of ways in the past year, and, people can work remotely, but people still want to be around others. They want to be in the city, and they should have that opportunity. And I encourage you and everyone who's on this call, and I want to thank, we had, I think, over 70 people on between here and Facebook right now. And I want to say thank you for this. And keeping that in mind is that, as people are coming to the city, we need to build to accommodate that growth. And we need to build also for folks who are here, so they aren't getting pushed out by people who have a higher income or have more resources. And Boston continues to stay a diverse and dynamic city. And, Housing Forward continues to be a resource for you, for folks at all levels of government. And we really thank you for your attention to this. And I want to thank the folks who participated. I apologize that we didn't get to all the questions. We do have limited time, but I encourage everyone to go to the Housing Forward Mass. It's housingforwardma.org, our website where this video will be posted. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, our schedule of other candidate conversations throughout this week. We have another one at 3 p.m. With City Councilor Sabi George and the others. And I just want to thank you, Mayor Janey, for your time, for your commitment on this. When we worked together on some of these issues on the City Council, it was the same philosophy that I saw that you've exhibited, as mayor. And when we're talking about these issues, I just think it demands the attention and the openness to new ideas and looking at ways we can be creative about increasing the housing supply. So I want to thank you. If you have anything you'd like to finish up.
I just want to thank you, and I want to thank all the folks at Housing Forward and everyone who has tuned in. Really appreciate the engagement. These are big challenges that are before us. And for some it can feel like they're huge obstacles, but I really view them as opportunities for us to continue to come together, dialogue, and make sure that we are putting the best solutions forward for our city. And I'm really grateful for all that you do in that space, and just wanted to thank you. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't also just thank Kendall Feynman of the Housing Forward team, who has done more than anyone to put this together. Our board supporters, really thank you all. And Mayor, have a wonderful day. And I just hope we'll keep these issues in mind and these potential solutions. And please use us as a resource. We're here to help. So thank you. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see hopefully some of you at 3 o'clock.